anyone can clearly see the efforts Depero put into developing an all-round campaign for Campari. However, as already anticipated, this relation wasn't just a business contract. It had a vaster meaning to Depero. The commissions Depero received from Campari allowed him to perform art in the way he thought it was meant to be. And that was instrumental in this futurist plan of rebuilding the very foundations of the modern world. It's not a surprise then that Depero's most famous art manifesto, the so-called Bolt Book, opens with a dedication to Davide Campari, described as a brave and chosen friend of artists, who, for his generous collaboration, merits my humble thanks. Partly flattery, partly true acknowledgement, this dedication tells what Campari and Depero were to each other, before and beyond being a patron and artist. They were collaborators, which in brief means they were on the same mission of changing the world while getting rich. Dreams of a country boy who embraced the future, they were not. Honking cars, busy streets, looming skyscrapers and rumbling trains. Depero was one of the few Italian futurists who actually lived the modern life and tasted its bittersweet flavor. From 1928 to 1930, he lived in New York and conducted business there, proposing his concept to sales and art directors, as he did in Milan. And when he finally reached the peak of modernity, the heart of what is new, quick and bold, that's when his trust in the future betrayed him. The filth and the smoke and the clamor, the loneliness, the alienation, the misery. Real life in New York wasn't kind to Depero. When he landed there, he didn't speak a word of English and had very few contacts. A friend gave him the keys to his office in Brooklyn. Depero slept there, but had to leave every morning before work hours, which he spent working the streets. During these long hours, he discovered how city life isn't necessarily a blessing bestowed on us by modern times, especially if the suburbs you roam don't reflect the lights of Broadway. Modernity showed Depero its hidden face, eroded the trust in the future he once naively shared with his Italian comrades. That's how Depero fared back then, according to Boschiero.
Fortuna volle, in barba al suo nome,
despite his name, Fortunato, which means lucky, Depero landed in New York at a very bad time, on the eve of the Wall Street crash. If it wasn't for his advertising art, if he had been, let's say, a regular artist, he wouldn't have made it. His tapestries, his creations, were perceived as artisanal, even homespun by Americans, people who were accustomed to certain standards, typical of an industrialized country. His love for the advertising business was the ace up his sleeves.
After a while, he was joined by Rosetta, who helped him to open and run a futuristic house in New York. Art critics started to visit the atelier and seemed to appreciate Depero's work, its novelty, its groundbreaking style. Their support was worth a few personal exhibitions in prominent spots, like the Advertising Club or the Guarino Gallery. Despite the moderate success of his art amongst the artistic community, Depero wasn't receiving any commission yet. His letters to Fedele Azzari tells us a lot about what was going on behind the curtains. Apparently, he found New York life boring. The art market was even worse. According to Depero, art exhibitions were the playgrounds for a flock of parvenus who used to show up, have a chat, and pose in their designer labels. Needless to say, they didn't understand a thing about art, and they bought even less. To cut a deal you needed an executive, but they only purchased ancient art and such. Their taste in arts was plain soporific. a little bit of modernism here and there, but God forbid buying something avant-garde. In the end, Depero tried a rather curious publicity stunt to save the day and prolong his stay in New York. Prospects and patrons weren't in for his art. He only had to change the bait. Instead of luring them with the promise of an art soirée focused on avant-garde, he used the ravioli, Rosina's ravioli. After all, everyone loves Italian food, right? So he invited 20 people and had them sit around the table, just in the middle of the atelier. It was lunchtime and people were getting hungry. The artist served them plenty of ravioli, together with a load of Italian dishes, each one carefully cooked by his wife. While they were eating, he showed them a few of his works, pointing at the paintings hanged on the walls all around them. Apparently, the pleasure of eating home-cooked food made the audience malleable, because at the end of the meal, Depero acquired contacts, sold some pieces, and received a few commissions too. So, all in all, did Depero manage to earn enough money to prolong his stay in the States? No, he didn't. That's why, in 1931, he came back to Italy. It was time to finalize his next big thing. One would say that while Depero was in New York, he was so busy making a name for himself in the advertising business that he forgot about Campari. That was not the case. During his last American year, he worked on a special Campari project, the Numero Unico Futurista Campari, that is the Campari Special Futurist issue. It's a book conceived as a Christmas present sent by Campari to prestigious partners and such. Inside you'll find a collection of Campari advertising material. Every page is covered in posters and affiches. Readers were supposed to look at these pictures while listening to a custom tune, whose score has been printed on one of the pages. If you carefully read the Numero Unico, you'll notice that it has a certain way to convey ideas. Depero was running some tests on something we can call the choral approach to communication, according to which images, words and music harmonically cooperates to convey a message. Let's take the short poems you find in the book. The words are embedded within drawings, so that both elements, poems and drawings, engage in some sort of conversation. Instead of repeating the same concept in words and pictures, Depero used two channels, writing and drawing, to convey two messages that, while interacting with each other, blend into one. For instance, look at the poster portraying Campari's liqueurs as traffic lights. You can see it on our site, italianculturepodcast.com. This poster suggests that drinking Campari somehow regulates the dynamics of modern life. The poem, printed on the next page, complements this message by telling the story of a sad man who reached happiness through a 3-steps process. These 3 phases are symbolized by the 3 lights of the Campari traffic signal that drives the sad man towards a glass of cordial. This peculiar code of communication mixes with a rather modern narrative strategy. Depero noticed that successful marketing operations didn't just sell the product. They rather created a world in which the product had meaning and then lured the consumer in it. So instead of proposing to exchange a few coins for a delicious drink, because it tastes fine, Depero invited the customer in a realm of dazzling, solid light. He tapped into the futurist symbolism to portray Campari as the core of the modern electric world. In these affiches, the bottle of bitter is represented as a beacon guiding people towards the future, or as the pulsing heart that animates a skyscraper. Campari is what the future looks like, and everyone can taste it just by sipping a glass of liquor. Trust, joy, smiles and youth, one carefree embrace in which one may thrive. That's what drinking Campari means. That's the paradise of steel and glass, whose doors Depero opened for the years to come, until they closed. The numero unico is considered to be the last and most significant product of the Depero-Campari collaboration. From 1931 onwards, Depero gradually drifted apart from Campari and advertising in general. He still entered a few competitions to develop advertising campaigns, but he lost the enthusiasm he once felt for the business. The advertising world also took another turn, embracing new trends that shared less and less with Depero's style. However, the seeds he sowed during the years he spent working in the field were silently germinating, bounded to give fruit in due time. That's why, in order to understand what happened next, we'll need to go back in time a little bit.